Korean ties are on a more even footing with the lowering of tensions over THAAD. The two countries celebrated the 10th anniversary of the strategic partnership in 2018 and are working to expand cooperation and strengthen communication on issues of the Korean Peninsula. Still, how hard is it to restore trust in an already tense region? What is the outlook on denuclearization of the peninsula?
And what's next for regional economic integration in Northeast Asia?
To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy today to be joined here by our co-host, Jennifer Moon from South Korea's Arirang TV. Hello, Jennifer.
Hello there. Well, thank you so much for the invite. We're delighted to be joining you here at the CGTN headquarters in Beijing.
Meanwhile, we are very happy to be joined here by two distinguished guest speakers. One is Dr. Li Gung from the ROK and Professor Rong Ying from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome to our discussion here. What would be your first question, Jennifer?
Well, since we're on the topic, why don't we discuss the issues following up on the THAAD standoff that South Korea and China have decided to mend their ties after that. Now, are we completely over that, or do effects still linger? How do you feel?
I think the issue is not completely over yet, but the THAAD issue is at the moment is under the surface. But there is a possibility that it's going to resurface again if and when North Korea use its own provocation card again. For example, if North Korea launches another missile, if North Korea tests its nuclear capability again, then there is going to be a lot of South Korea's public opinion to do something against it. Therefore, I think it is very, very imperative for both South Korea and China to cooperate to persuade North Korea that launching of another missile or nuclear test would not help solving the problems of nuclear programs on the Korean Peninsula, as well as the security dynamics of Northeast Asia.
Very clear point about the roller coaster ties between the two Koreas. But Mr. Rong Ying, do you think the latest test of two short-range missiles by the DPRK is a result of the walk by President Trump from Hanoi without signing an agreement with his North Korean counterpart?
Well, certainly I think this is the background of that recent development and particularly I think the two testings by the North Korea. But of course we have to look beyond and look in a way that the stalled sort of process of denuclearization and the slow or no implementation of the agreements between North Korea and the United States, the June 12th joint statement in which the two sides committed to complete denuclearization by the North Korea and to work together for a kind of new peace regime on the Northeast Asia, and then the U.S. pledged to work for a new type of relationship.
Excuse me, are you suggesting actually that we haven't been able to turn the page and been able to move forward instead of focusing on the issue of a THAAD again over and over?
Yeah, that's I think the general understanding of the expert on that. If we look beyond, if we're able to implement this agreement and we're able to look beyond, I mean, instead of looking the past, then we possibly can have a new future. That is, I think, if that's a lesson. Because in the past, there are many agreements, there are many understandings, and there are many statements that have never been able to implement it. And that a good lesson need to learn. I think the Chinese side made it very clear at this moment that the two sides, a relevant side, if I can say, should draw the correct lessons, but more importantly, work together with the support of the countries for a roadmap to implement.
Right. I think that is very correct and clear. But definitely, do you think that South Korea and North Korea, from the perspective of the South Koreans, are in a position that we're comfortable enough to go beyond the THAAD installation? Are we comfortable enough with North Korea that we can actually go beyond the THAAD installation and perhaps work to go without THAAD?
In other words, do you think President Moon Jae-in is ready to claim the Nobel Peace Prize?
Well, I thought it was President Trump who was to claim that. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think the Nobel laureate will be decided by the people in Norway, so I don't have any opinion on that.
You may cast the vote if you like.
Well, I sincerely hope that President Moon will, be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, but you never know. With regard to the issue of THAAD, as I said, the issue of THAAD is not only a problem between South Korea and China, but also this is a problem between USA and China, involving all the regional powers in Northeast Asia. Therefore, we have to handle this issue very carefully. First of all, I think the real trigger for the next crisis involving THAAD would be, as I said, the North Korea's provocation. Therefore, it is very important to proceed with the current negotiation with North Korea to denuclearize North Korea. And in order to do that, I think we need to come up with a very clear definition of certain things, because we have started this negotiation without a clarity of some of the very important concepts. For example, what is the definition of denuclearization? What is the definition of denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula rather than denuclearization of North Korea? So what is the end state that we are aiming for? Of course, the USA has already expressed its opinion about the end state of all the roadmap, which is going to be either CVID or FFVD, if you will. But North Korea has not revealed its own vision of the end state. Particularly, I'm very curious about North Korea's post-nuclear vision of its own security guarantee. They haven't said anything about what to do after denuclearization. How are they going to guarantee their own security? And there's, again, not a very clear evidence of North Korea's willingness to denuclearize. For example, the complete list of North Korea's nuclear program, if that is going to be a target list for U.S. surgical strike, then North Korea can reveal its nuclear program without geographical location.
So on this current stage, I'm afraid we are still talking about the talk. For example,
Right.
definition, the redefinition of denuclearization, that kind of discussions are going on and on. But what do you think of the positive signs, for example, from the American side, in terms of holding the annual military war games with South Koreans? They have ceased to host such war games on the doorsteps of the DPRK, so that President Kim Jong-un might feel a little bit relaxed. What do you think of this kind of preparations for more chapters following Hanoi?
On that military exercise, I'm not sure whether to cease or suspended. As a matter of fact, I think there recently, I think the ROK and the U.S. Conducted on a smaller scale,
Yes.
or with different nature or different names
right.
sometimes. So the security issues indeed is there. Talking about the security assurances, security guarantees that North Korea is looking for, I think certainly it is the issue. It is the issue, and it is the defining issues. But as I said, that we have a lot of experience. We have a lot of lessons to learn. Focusing on that will lead to nowhere. That is a lesson for me. I think we have to learn. The positive side, talking about that, for the past years, which the peace, the process of talk, or if I say the process, political solution, the process political solution on the question of North Korea, is that all the parties, directly concerned, say, i.e., North Korea and the U.S., including, I think, the other parties, ROK, China, and others, all agreed that there's no way except talks to address this issue. And for that, they have a summit, reached a joint statement, not only between U.S. and North Korea, but also with the inter-Korean.
My question for my
So
South
this is
Korean
important.
counterpart, Jennifer, is whether we have a regional security mechanism, such as six-party talks, or like the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. Well, what are your thoughts, Jennifer?
Well, as for the Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity, it's of course a very different nature from the six-party talks, where the six-party talks is an international framework in which the six parties would try to denuclearize or bring North Korea to the negotiations table for denuclearization. Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity is more of an academic forum, I believe. Now, my question that I want to lay out there for both of you experts is whether we're on the right track for denuclearization of North Korea. I mean, with the latest developments on this front, and of course, North Korea, however, firing its 2 short-range missiles, are we on the right track to denuclearize North Korea? Yeah.
Dr. Lee.
Yeah, I think I agree with you that we have to take a very innovative new path. You know, we have to learn lessons from the past. Therefore, I would argue that with a very clear understanding of where our goalpost is, we have to move ahead with involving the leaders of the countries. Otherwise, we would not know where we are heading, and we don't know, after taking the road, we don't know whether or not we have enough fuel. We don't know whether or not we have a map. But at the same time, we have to move forward. And in order to do that, either side of the peninsula should refrain from provoking each other. Therefore, the military exercise, joint U.S.-ROK military exercise, they have been reduced in terms of scale. So we have given a very large-scale military exercise like Key Resolve or Eagle or UFG. The exercise that we have done for the past few months was a very reduced-scale exercise. And I'm sure that North Korea was, to a certain extent, provoked by our exercise. But for that particular reason, we have the so-called hotline. We have a telephone communication line between, our Blue House and on the desk of Chairman Kim. We have to use those kinds of confidence-building measures more often. So I think that is one of the agreements that we reached during the summit meeting.
By the way, Dr. Lee and Mr. Rong Ying, China has been very supportive of the UN-led economic sanctions against the DPRK on issues of denuclearization. For that, China's position remains pretty firm. Having said this, let's look at why multilateralism is featured more prominently today in media coverage about the bilateral relationship between the United States and China. Forgive me for singling out this issue for our discussion today, because the United States is so superpower following the Soviet disintegration back in the early 1990s, and a trade war is well underway. I'd like to have your thoughts, Professor Lee, about whether South Korea would have to take side in this trade war, which is likely to spill into yet another arena of a tech war and even geopolitical rivalry. Globalization has been a huge factor in South Korea's growth and economic success, yet what President Trump does seems to be the early signs of deglobalization, and that's pretty worrisome.
I agree with you. If I have to make an advice to the government, I will say that we should support the so-called liberal international order. The international order should be open. It has to be liberal. The multilateralism should be the champion of the order. So as President Xi Jinping repeatedly say, China and international society should be the champions of liberal international order. Therefore, President Trump...
What do you mean by liberal international economic order? Does it mean automatically multilateralism?
Multilateralism...
and respect for United Nations, WTO,
the consensual solution of the conflict by abiding by institutional norms and principles and international law. I think that has been, our, norms, normalcy for the past, 30 or 40 years, and we should keep that particular liberal international order. In that sense, I think President Trump, in the future will be retaliated by the market. I think market forces are very, very strong. The stock market will crash, there will be capital flight, so the market forces will, in the future, I think, will retaliate against President Trump.
Definitely, markets fluctuate because of this particular trade dispute. And of course, because the world's 2 largest economies are in such a trade dispute, it will eventually trickle down to other economies such as South Korea, as we are big trade partners with both China and the U.S. I'd like to know China's stance on this trade dispute.
Well, I think the trade, dispute, or it's been something I think very unfortunate, certainly for China and the U.S., and also for the region and the world as a whole. I think the situation we are having now is something I think China does not want to see. And before I think the recent sort of episode of the trade dispute, retaliation, tariff, there were hope. There were actually expectation that the 11 round of talks would lead to some conclusion. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. And that was exactly because provoked by the United States. The announcement, even the starting of the recent round of talks. So China, despite that, China still showed its sincerity and it showed its readiness to work with the United States to find a solution to that. So that is very, the fortunate side is that so far the two sides, even the U.S. side has not said the talk has collapsed. So that is, I think, the positive side. Now, what we are going to see, or want to see, is that I think from China's perspective, we hope the United States would come out of, go beyond that unilateralism, that American first sort of approach, to take its responsibility as a leading power, as a superpower, as the largest economy in the world, and taking into account the concerns of countries, even like South Korea and others, that what its policy has implications and impacts for the region and beyond. That is exactly what Chinese are saying. The bilateral trade issues is not just bilateral. It is going to have implications, impacts for the region and beyond. China is taking the responsibility, but it takes two to tango.
So
I think this is not the first time that U.S. has taken the unilateral approach to the global issues. In the past, Nixon administration was very unilateral. Reagan administration was very unilateral, and George W. Bush, the second Bush, was very unilateral, and now this time President Trump becomes very unilateral, but every time the market restored the liberal international order, so there is a hope.
But unilateral moves may come out of domestic political sentiments.
Right.
Unilateralism is unanimously supported by the die-hard electorate of Donald Trump in the Midwest and Rust Belt. So perhaps, yet there is a silver lining on the horizon. For example, the G20 is to take place in Japan. Yeah. Leaders from the game involved are likely to converge on the sidelines of the G20 and talk about what can be done to help find a solution. I wonder if you guys can discuss whether we're going to have a better future through a summit meeting on the sidelines of G20.
Well, if I may, certainly I think it's going to be held. It seems that President Trump, through his Twitters, are expecting that.
That is a question that I would really like to know from the South Korea's perspective. Do we see a semi-conclusion, at least at the Osaka G20 summit, on the sidelines? During the meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump, do we expect some kind of a conclusion or closure to come there? And how will South Korea react to this? Obviously, we are very much affected by this.
Before discussing our reaction, I think...
Sure. I think China's position is very clear. As I said that, and as which is known to all, that if U.S. want to talk, let's talk. If U.S. want to do different way, China is ready. So if the U.S., or President Trump himself, take it as a tactics for negotiations, then that's fine. China is ready. But if it is, as want to do in a different way, China is also have to get prepared for that. So for me, we have to be hopeful, and we are hopeful. In the end, that we have to find a way to address these issues and through talks. So tariff, trade war is not going to help. Neither, I think, going to be address the issue.
Let me paraphrase what the Professor Zhong Yung says a little bit. China would never be the first to launch preemptive and unilateral moves. It's the United States that assumes the responsibility of the world leadership. But Jennifer raised a very interesting question as to what South Korea can do to help ease the tensions so that we can further the regional integration between Japan, ROK, and China.
Well, actually, my question was, I don't know whether South Korea is in the position to actually change the game here, this game between China.
But you're an ally of the United States, so you can say something.
Oh, yes,
right?
we're definitely an ally, I must say.
Very sovereign.
We're an ally of the U.S., good friends with China, as you know. my
That's
friend.
the message the Jeju Forum delivers every year.
But I'd like to know how this will affect South Korea and what we should be doing.
Yeah, it's going to affect South Korea very, very heavily. If there is a trade war between those two superpowers, I mean, South Korea's economy will be very heavily affected. Therefore,
For example?
The stock market will crash, the exchange rate will fluctuate very heavily.
And 5G, the 5G technology. For example, Iran did very well in displaying its latest development in the 5G smartphones, and Huawei did that almost simultaneously to hold the press conference to let them know that there is a very nice competition between Iran, no, that's not Iran, the CGTN, but Samsung and Huawei.
Right, and of course, South Korea became the first country to commercialize 5G, beating our U.S. competitor, right? Their U.S. competitor, Verizon. So
where do you stand on the issue of Huawei?
Well, 5G is just an infrastructure. This is a communication a network, the very high-speed communication network. But what is important is what can we make use out of it. The 5G network. I think China is a lot ahead of South Korea. I think the U.S. is also concerned about Chinese competitiveness because, first of all, the big data that you can collect. And also the increasing capability of artificial intelligence and all the related digital revolution that you are experiencing. Therefore, South Korea is not only a competitor, but we are very concerned. So I hope we can have a very cooperative relations between South Korea and China. And I hope we can have your big data as a kind of public good.
One of the major reasons why you guys have been brought here for a nice discussion on what the future might hold for ROK China and yet another heavyweight player, Japan, is, for example, globalization and the pullout, particularly unilateral pullout by the United States from TPP. Ironically, Japan is likely to assume the leadership in engineering formation of TPP in the days to come. I wonder, Rong-Ying and Li Gong would go ahead and give us your opinion about what the future of regional integration be like for ROK and China as a result of the United States pullout from TPP.
Well, of course, TPP now has a different name. They call themselves CPTPP, and neither China and Korea has not yet to be part of that. But we have our own sort of sub-regional or regional sort of mechanism that is we call CJK, China, Japan, and Korea, which was launched 20 years ago and been going very well. And we have already signed the trade agreement on investment and working very closely and advanced stage actually to reach the free trade organization, free trade agreement. And we are also three major sort of players of another bigger and similar regional arrangement that is we call the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and the three countries are working very close. And last but not least, the three countries are working very closely to push the implementation, realization of the East Asia Economic Community, which is again a kind of a commitment of the three countries and working on that. So TPP certainly is important, but the U.S. the withdrawal has implications. But I think the three major players of the region and which all advocates, all uphold the multilateralism, open economy, we are working together very well, and we are working, I think, steadily.
Are you talking about the Romance of Three Kingdoms? One of the classical novels of China. What do you think of the romance?
Well, I think that's a too old version of the story.
You could help update the story a little bit about the Three Kingdoms.
Well, for the past 10 to 15 years, Korean government has been a champion of free trade agreements. We reached free trade agreement with the USA, with China, with the European Union, so many countries. So I do think that as many free trade agreements, I think that's good for all the countries in the world. as long as we can have some kind of safeguards against the volatility of the market. And I also do think that if we have KCJ cooperation, if we have RCEP, and if we have TPP, I think that's going to complement the failures of WTO system. So the free trade agreements with as many countries as possible will help contain the USA from going further with its own unilateralism.
Well, I think this is a very useful, very practical session of a brainstorming discussion about the common future that we should share together with our important business partner, ROK. I thank you so much for being part of this meaningful dialogue on issues like denuclearization, globalization, particularly, I'm afraid, the THAAD issue, which most of the Chinese would agree. Let's turn the page, let's move on, let's adopt a forward-looking attitude. Jennifer, what do you want to say as part of the conclusion?
Well, as for that, we've been in Korea, we've been seeing more Chinese tourists return to Korea. So I think it's a sign that we're actually moving beyond that. And I'd like to keep our fingers crossed that we will move beyond that and restore relations between the two countries. As for this session, I'm sure Dr. Lee agrees with me, but it was a very delightful session for us as well, that we got to have this candid discussion with our partners at CGTN.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Nice discussion.
And we hope the next time you'll be in Seoul to discuss and pick up on this discussion.
Great expectations and tale of two cities. See you next time.